All right, so we're diving into the Amhara struggle today. And you sent over a ton of stuff on Eskinder Nega.
Right.
And honestly, some of those accusations against him are intense.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack for sure. A lot of
Yeah.
strong opinions out there, but it's important to dig into it.
Definitely, and it seems like everyone's got an opinion on him, but what's the reality?
Yeah.
To start, we've got 4 main accusations to unpack. He's not a true Amhara nationalist. His ideology clashes with other FANO leaders. He's a leadership flop.
Right.
And he's stirring the pot and dividing the FANO militias.
You've hit all the major points there.
Okay.
But I think before we even get into the specifics of those accusations, we need to take a step back and talk about the broader context here.
Yep.
The Amhara struggle, especially with the rise of the FANO militias, it's not something that just came out of nowhere. We're talking about really deep-rooted issues in Ethiopia. Land rights, ethnic identity, security concerns.
Right.
A sense among the Amhara people that they've been marginalized and pushed aside.
Yeah, it feels like it's way more than just like
absolutely.
the social media
It's deeper than that.
beef or something like that.
Way deeper.
There's real history
Exactly.
and real pain fueling these accusations.
You got it.
Okay, so let's circle back to Eskinder Nega then.
Okay.
This whole not a true Amhara nationalist thing,
Yeah.
like the stuff you shared paints a completely different picture.
Right.
It's like, where are people even getting that from?
I know, right? Because his history with the Amhara movement goes way back.
Okay.
I mean, you're talking early 1990s, all Amhara People's Organization. He was super involved there.
Right.
Even served as vice chairman for a while.
And speaking of those early days, you shared that YouTube clip of Eskinder's speech from back then.
Oh, yeah.
Which is really fascinating. It's like taking a time machine back to the origins of this whole struggle.
It's a great historical document.
Definitely. We'll be sure to link that in the show notes for everyone listening.
Please do.
But, I mean, he was never afraid to speak his mind, was he?
No. And you can see that especially in 1999, when the All Amhara People's Organization wanted to transform into the All Ethiopian Unity Party.
Right.
He opposed it.
He was like, absolutely not.
He was like, no way, because he believed that the Amhara people were still too vulnerable at that time and needed their own dedicated voice for their interests.
Wow. Talk about foresight.
Right.
Especially considering everything that's happened since then.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, okay, he's got the history. But what about more recently? What has he actually done?
Well, he co-founded Balderas, for one.
Okay.
It started as this civic council, but it became much more politically active.
Okay.
Really focused on exposing what they believed was the systematic marginalization of the Amhara people.
So what did that look like in action? Give me an example.
Well, they were really vocal about, for example, what they called demographic engineering in Addis Ababa.
I have heard that term before. I'm not going to lie. I could use a little bit of a refresher.
So basically it refers to policies that, whether intentionally or not, lead to changes in the ethnic makeup of a certain region.
Right.
In this case, Balderas was arguing that the Addis Ababa city government was enacting policies that were pushing out longtime Amhara residents in favor of other groups.
That's a very serious accusation.
Oh, absolutely. And that's just one example. They also called out things like the removal of Amhara public officials from key positions,
Right.
the unequal distribution of land and resources.
Right.
They saw all of these as very deliberate attempts to kind of undermine the Amhara people's political and economic power within the country.
So very much focused on advocating for the Amhara people within the existing Ethiopian state.
Yes.
Which is interesting because the next accusation is that Eskinder has these fundamental ideological differences with other FANO leaders.
Right, right. And this accusation that his ideology clashes with other FANO leaders suggests that he and other leaders are actually pushing for a separate Amhara state.
Right, like a total break from Ethiopia.
Completely.
But then you look at what they actually say.
Right.
And the evidence you gathered seems to suggest otherwise.
Totally. And you actually included some really powerful quotes from other prominent FANO leaders that I thought really speak to this.
Okay.
Zemene Kassi, in an interview with Ethio 360, said, and I quote,
Okay.
Eskinder and I have the same goal, saving Amharas and Ethiopia.
Wow.
He even went on about how their moral and ideological, even spiritual alignment.
Yeah, it really seems like they see the fate of the Amhara people as being deeply intertwined with the fate of Ethiopia as a whole.
Completely, yeah. They're not separate in their minds.
Right.
And there's another quote that stood out to me, this one from Esej Nimakanen to Amhara Media Corporate, and he said, "Can we view Amhara and Ethiopia separately? They aren't separate. We can't make a distinction.
Right. It's like their identities are completely inseparable.
Exactly.
Okay, so that really challenges this simplistic narrative that we sometimes see.
Totally.
Ethnic nationalism equals separatism.
Exactly. Exactly. Because we don't see that kind of explicitly anti-Ethiopia ideology from FANO leaders that we see from, let's say, the TPLF or the OLF.
Right, right. And
Yeah.
just for context for me and for our listeners, those are
Yeah, of
groups
course.
that have historically advocated for
Right, for self-determination.
self-determination or outright
Secession from Ethiopia.
secession.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so we've got this accusation of not being a true nationalist debunked.
Right.
The whole ideology difference out the window.
Yep.
Let's talk leadership.
Okay.
Some sources calling Eskinder a leadership failure.
Right.
But the evidence you gathered seemed to, again, contradict that.
It does. It does. And we have to remember the conditions under which he was operating. I mean, we're talking about someone who was in prison for a significant period of time.
Right, and not exactly like a slap on the wrist kind of imprisonment.
No, no, no. Harsh conditions. And yet he was still able to lead and inspire from prison, like incredible resilience.
And he wasn't just like kicking back, writing manifestos from his cell. I mean, he was still actively involved with Balderas while he was imprisoned.
Oh, absolutely. And they were doing really important work during that time, exposing what they believed was the truth about the Abiy Ahmed government, which wasn't exactly a popular stance to take.
So they were calling him out early on.
Oh, from the beginning, they were some of the first to publicly challenge that narrative of Abiy Ahmed as this reformer.
Interesting.
Arguing that he was basically just replacing one form of ethnic exclusion with another. They even challenged the legitimacy of those elections that were held. While Eskinder and other Balderas candidates were imprisoned, they said it was a complete sham.
So he's leading a movement, he's challenging the government, all while behind bars. That doesn't sound like a leadership failure to me.
No, not at all. It speaks to his commitment to his principles, even in the face of really intense pressure.
Right, and that brings us, I think, to maybe the most serious accusation of all, that Eskinder is dividing the FANO militias, turning them against each other.
Right, that's the one that gets thrown around a lot online. And you can see why it's effective, because it sows doubt, it creates suspicion, and it weakens the movement from within.
Right, right. But again, you look at the evidence you gathered, and it seems like the complete opposite is actually happening.
Exactly. And what I find really fascinating here is that he's being accused of the very thing that he's been actively working against, dividing the FANOs.
Right, you're talking about his work with the Amhara Popular Front, unifying the FANO factions.
Exactly, because before the APF, you had all these different FANO factions operating independently. Each Amhara province had multiple, it was like this very decentralized network, which, might sound good in theory, but it made it incredibly difficult to coordinate their efforts effectively.
So Eskinder saw this as a critical weakness and decided to push for a more unified command structure.
Yes, and his commitment was more than just talk. The APF, under his guidance, actually provided significant financial assistance, around $600,000 to independent FANO factions.
Wait, so he was giving resources to groups outside of his own organization?
Oh, yeah. It wasn't about forcing them to join the APF. It was about recognizing that a united front requires supporting all of those who are fighting for the same cause, regardless of their specific affiliation.
It's like he was putting the Amhara cause above any personal ambition.
Exactly. And it's been working, because one of the things you flagged was that recent unification of 7 FANO factions from all 4 Amhara provinces under Eskinder's leadership.
Right.
That's huge.
It's massive, yeah.
Think about it. For the first time, you have groups from all 4 Amhara provinces on the same page, and that's largely thanks to his efforts.
It really makes you wonder, then, if unifying the FANO is so obviously a good thing, why the resistance? Why are these accusations about him being divisive still circulating?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the material you shared hints at some possible answers, things that might be happening behind the scenes that could explain some of this pushback.
Okay.
I think whenever you have a struggle that is as emotionally charged as the Amhara movement, there are always going to be people, both inside and outside the movement, who benefit from chaos and division.
So you're saying someone might actually have something to gain from the FANO being divided?
It wouldn't be the first time in history, right?
Right.
And the sources specifically mentioned the role of state actors here.
Okay.
The Ethiopian government, especially certain elements within the Amhara Prosperity Party, haven't always seen eye to eye with the FANO militias.
Right.
You know, the FANO represent a really powerful, decentralized force that operates outside of those traditional power structures.
Right.
It's not hard to imagine that some would prefer to see them weakened and divided.
So keep them fractured, keep them from becoming too powerful, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Oh.
And then you have this whole other layer of external forces to consider as well.
You mean like other countries or groups with interests in the region?
Exactly. You know, groups who might stand to benefit from instability in Ethiopia,
Right.
they could very well be actively working to stir the pot, to prevent the emergence of this strong, unified Amhara movement that might challenge their interests.
Wow, that adds a whole other layer of complexity to things.
Right.
It makes it almost impossible to know what information to trust.
It really highlights the importance of media literacy, especially in this day and age, when information or misinformation spreads like wildfire online.
Right.
You know, it's more important than ever to take a step back, cross-reference your sources, really consider the motivations of the people who are putting this information out there.
Right, you've got to ask yourself, who benefits from this information being out there?
Exactly.
What are they trying to accomplish?
Exactly. And on that note, I think it's also really important to remember what's actually at stake here, you know? We're not just talking about some kind of abstract political arguments.
Right.
This is about the lives and futures of the Amhara people who are facing very real threats.
And the sources were really sobering about the violence, the displacement, the very real fear that their culture and way of life are kind of under attack.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff.
Yeah, it's a lot.
And that's why, regardless of your personal views on Eskinder Nega or any other leader for that matter, the need for unity within the Amhara movement has never been greater.
Yeah, divided they fall, united they stand, right? It's a tale as old as time.
It really is. And in the face of the challenges they're facing, the Amhara people need to draw on every ounce of strength and solidarity they can muster.
Absolutely, well said.
Yeah.
Well, this deep dive has been fascinating, eye-opening, and honestly, a bit unsettling.
It's complicated.
The accusations against Eskinder Nega are serious, but the deeper we dig, the more it seems like there's more to the story. It's a good reminder to always question what we see and hear, especially when it comes to these complex geopolitical situations. What seems black and white on the surface is often anything but.
Couldn't agree more. There are so many factors at play here, so many competing narratives that it really does take effort to kind of get to the heart of the matter.
Well, on that note, a huge thank you to you and to you listening for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be sure to include all the links and resources that we talked about in the show notes. And remember, keep asking those tough questions. Until next time, stay curious.